Whoa.
We should be going live now. Do you see it?
You're live. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Thursday, April 17th. This is Natural Resources and Energy. And we are starting off the morning revisiting H125, energy reporting. And we have Mr. Faber here with us this morning from the Public Utility Commission. Welcome. Thank you.
Morning, folks. My name is Greg Faber. I work with the PUC. Here to speak about H125 this morning. We're fine with this bill. We're not directly implicated in it as a listed agency, but we will consult with A&R and any information they need.
Amazing. Wow.
That's
Easy as that.
If you have a question, but that's pretty much it.
Okay. Wow. Super. Any questions for Mr. Faber? Okay,
Right.
running well ahead.
My favorite testimony ever.
You showed your time this morning. It's a lovely time.
That's great. Okay, well, if we have any other questions for you, we'll let you know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So our next witness is not until 9:15. So I assume Secretary Moore is not joining us remotely.
She's in it.
She's in the building?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, perhaps we can take a little break until we get to having our next witness.
All right, and I can eat my yogurt, not on the screen. Can we go off live so I can eat my yogurt without being videotaped?
I don't know, Jude, can you hear us? You can hear us. We can turn the audio off. Let's do that.
Yeah, turn the audio off.
Okay.
Hmm. Let's just be quiet. Check for notes there. We might want to unmute the iPad. Could we unmute the iPad?
Oh, you're fine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Morning.
Okay, but this is Senate Natural Resource and Energy coming back from a break, and we are joined by Secretary Moore. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a couple things to talk about. We'll start with H-125.
Yes.
And yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And would you mind closing the door? Thank you so much. Yeah.
So good morning, for the record, Julie Moore, I'm the Secretary of Natural Resources, and I'm joined this morning by Jane Lazorchuk, who heads our Climate Action Office, and Andrea Wright, who is the Environmental Program Manager for the Agency of Transportation. Just want to start with an appreciation for the House Energy Committee and their work on this bill. They really did work with us to align what's being asked for in H-125 with available data sets. And I see that both as a strength and frankly, somewhat of a challenge. And I'll talk about that a little bit. I understand that the overall goal of H-125 is really to be able to have data-informed policy discussions, and that is a huge priority for my agency. And I know for the other agencies particularly involved in climate work. And we are fully committed to ensuring legislators have all of the relevant information available and at hand in order to inform policy making work. Because most of this information or the information requested by the bill is already collected and provided, it's a challenge to me in this moment where I feel my team is stretched unbelievably thin to see that it's value added to repackage that information into another report. I know it's looking for a 5-year look back and tracking trends over time, and so understand there may be value in looking not just at a single year of data, which is how a lot of that information is brought into the legislature, but multiple years, but just would be remiss if I didn't reflect how underwater I think many A&R staff feel right now. And I don't see this necessarily as the highest and best use of their time. The other piece I just want to make sure is on folks' radar, and we did talk to House Energy about this at some length, is work that Jane and her team currently have underway to develop this, what we're calling a measuring and assessing progress or MAP tool. This is one of the obligations under the Global Warming Solutions Act, where it directed the agency to develop a systematic approach for being able to look at progress over time. And I am optimistic that this will help answer many of those same questions. We do have a contractor on board at this point to help us with addressing or implementing the measuring and assessing progress tool. Jane's certainly in a position to answer questions you may have about specifics. But I would hope you would see this as just another indication of our commitment to ensuring the General Assembly has access to the information you need to make informed decisions. There is one piece of the bill that asks A&R to bring back recommendations around additional data that could be necessary to illustrate the changing energy landscape. When we were in committee, we sort of talked about this as leading indicators, right? A lot of what's asked for in that bill is a reflection back on prior years. And certainly looking at trends can be useful, but it doesn't necessarily give you a heads up on challenges that may lie ahead. And so that particular ask, I see as a piece that could have real value. But again, it's something I'm also hopeful the measuring and assessing progress tool will be positioned to shed some light on. So happy to pause there and take questions, or if you're interested in hearing any more specifics about the work Jane's team has underway, yield the floor to her too.
I want to ask about that last point. So it would be helpful to know which of these metrics you're anticipating might be duplicative of the work that is going to be pulled into that map to it.
Different.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to come? It comes to
I
me.
feel awkward behind. Thank you.
Morning, everyone, Jane was our chat. The measuring and assessing progress tool, as the secretary just alluded to, phase one is currently due to be complete by May 15th, the contract ends. That and we have a report, a draft report right now that actually speaks to both the logic models around tracking the programs and policies in place to address climate action. This is speaking to mitigation policy, but it's also inclusive of resilience and adaptation, as well as community engagement and communications, understanding that the Global Warming Solutions Act pointed us to think about metrics and data associated with all the suite of climate action. And that report also looked and linked to all the data sets that currently are in the state in an effort to match data to metrics that we were putting forward. And then there's an infrastructure recommendation that comes from this contractor. And that all comes, we have a draft of that report now, and it's looked to be wrapped up by May 15th. And so it speaks to data across all of the sectors. I couldn't list every data set, but I'd be more than happy, as you're considering this bill, to put forward that draft report that has all the tables of associated data that it's contemplating, the metrics, the models around it, and would be happy to submit that to Jude after.
Yeah, that would be excellent. Would love to see that. And be able to have those details to compare to what's being asked in here.
And understanding we didn't have that available when we were in House Energy
Yeah,
earlier
yeah.
in this session, right? So this works. The work is occurring in parallel.
Right.
And I'm hopeful that it'll meet a lot of the same needs.
Well, it's interesting that there's like this zeitgeist of like, we need good data. And this built by multiple entities, so that's
Yes,
good. Okay. So we'll be looking for that, and that will hopefully help speak to some of this. I don't want to interrupt if you have more that you wanted to say about any of this. There's a couple more questions. I had a note here on page 2, line 10. And on one of the data points being fossil fuel and electric consumption per unit of economic output, and that was something that you had I think someone along the way had said that was something that you had suggested. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to that one.
Yeah, so it was trying to look at over time if we are intensifying our use of fossil fuels or other forms of energy, recognizing our population is likely to grow. And so is what we're seeing growth just as a result of there being more humans in Vermont? Or are we actually seeing growth because people are consuming more? And I think it's important to be able to understand that difference. I'm worried that, some of what we are accomplishing in terms of energy efficiency and even transitioning folks from fossil fuel powered vehicles to electric vehicles is masked by modest increases in our population. So we're, our measure is gas sales, but we're not normalizing it to how many cars are on the road in Vermont. It becomes hard to see those trends. And so that was one suggestion for a way to try to be able to look across time. I think of it in the water quality space. It doesn't rain the same way every year. And so how do you look for trends when weather is driving most of that work, right? And the USGS did an incredible body of work trying to say, well, if it rained the same way every year, this is what would be happening over time, which was really powerful. And to me, that's the parallel in the climate space is trying to remove some of the noise from the system so that we can look at those larger trends.
I think of it as like normalizing the data across
Correct.
or thinking of it like, I appreciate it's like per unit of economic output. I also wonder if just per capita, right? Yeah, per person would also be because I guess there's also sort of an assumption there that if you have more people, you have more economic output, and if that they're
right, and
they're similar.
the flip side could be true too, right? If we started to experience a population decline and we saw that our fossil fuel use dropped, is it actually dropping
Right.
per capita or per unit of economic output, or is it just a reflection of the change in our population?
It's a interesting component when you look at the residential sector too, like that's something that we've actually now and through Energy Action Network have been able to actually show that the energy output of how we heat our homes is actually going down now.
Mm.
Whereas in the past, it's been very tied to weather.
Sure.
So how cold the winter is or how warm the winter is. But we've been actually able to break that apart over the last few years, and the most recent Energy Action Network report actually shows that the energy use in our homes is actually declining and it's separate from weather.
Very encouraging.
Yeah.
And also, so is that like per heating degree day? Or-
Yes, per
Okay.
heating degree day.
Okay, cool. That's great. I'm so glad that that data exists.
Yes.
Yeah, and that normalization, I think, is really important to these conversations so that we can actually understand the
What's
true
happening.
trends.
Right, and whether or not policies are working or not working, yeah. Other questions about this? No, okay. So hearing you about the, you know, this is the question of like, is this the best use of everybody's time? One of the things that was pointed out to us yesterday was that part C, the report shall also include all of these other things, and it sounded like these were things that maybe did not exist yet, identifying existing reports that may support relevant indicators, equity indicators, the graphic displays as opposed to mapping. Yeah.
All of that, yeah, those are things that will be in the map tool and in actually in-house energy and digital infrastructure, we did talk about the geographic display, because that is the vision for the measuring and assessing progress tool, is really thinking about how we portray that online as a you know, a geographically spatial database, and that's part of the recommendation right now. And what the right tool is to do that. So I believe in House Energy, we changed the language to ensure that if this moved forward, we would assimilate the data by county through like bar charts and I'm trying to look, it wouldn't be visually
Yeah.
associated for this report, but that is the long-term vision for the map tool.
So are you saying that all of these points under C would be, I don't know if you like, if you have.
I don't have it in front of me, but
Okay.
most of it,
Yeah.
we tried to align that with respect to the metrics we were doing in the map tool. Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, I mean, there's one that says additional data necessary to illustrate the impacts. I think that's sort of open-ended.
Yeah.
We're gonna take a cut at that with the map tool, but I could imagine people may have different visions of what that entails.
And you know, indicators around equity potentially also.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the engagement indicators that Jane is talking about too. We know that robust public engagement and meeting Vermonters where they're at is critical to getting those equitable outcomes. And her team has put in an incredible effort in building relationships in order to solicit input and feedback. And I think tracking that and being able to report back on how we are engaging a broad cross-section of Vermonters will be important.
And I will note that the overlap in team between the EJ unit, the Environmental Justice Unit, and the Climate Office on the mapping tool that is envisioned in the Environmental Justice Law, and the map tool has been very intercoordinated. Our office is helping select the contractor for that. They're understanding what is in the map tool so that we can really make sure that we're being complementary and additive around those two tools.
Okay. Great, any other questions? Yes.
I guess just to, you started off by talking about the work. Some of this will be done by transportation, some by
Public service.
service. So what parts of this, and I've kind of viewed this, maybe I'm doing it too simply, but it's just kind of compiling a lot of available information and putting it into one place, to make it easier to have the source. That doesn't sound like a huge amount of work, but there must be something in this that is more than I'm seeing. And so I want to give that.
Not necessarily, I mean, it is a significant undertaking, right? These are data sets that exist in different places, bringing them together, pulling 5 years of information. Developing the displays of that information, it's not insignificant.
Any other questions at this point? Great, thank you both, and hoping you can stick around for the next
Yes.
conversation. Great. It's taking me a second to transition here, but we want to move into chatting about our Sun Resources and Energy budget letter.
Yes.
You want to stay on 3 acres, you want to say about here?
No, I think others are joining you, but I'm hopeful.
I'm trying to go through all the data they sent, thank you, Neil, if you're listening.
He's up in the housing issue right now, so.
Was that?
So,
I believe that Jude posted it.
posted yesterday, yeah.
Um,
It was yesterday.
I think it was gonna be posted again, so let's just check that.
Hopefully I reviewed the most recent one, maybe I should grab our computer too. I think it's.
There's that.
Oh, there it is, right at the top for today. But
Well, so that is,
It's up there.
that's actually the letter from. That's actually the letter from Secretary Moore.
Oh, you're right.
Chief Feminist Officer.
Oh.
CF. It's for my immersion.
Updated.
Jude, by chance, do you have that letter the letter that I had that. That it has the chart in it?
Yeah.
Oh, you
Yes,
got it.
I believe I posted that under your name.
From yesterday.
I don't see a chart.
Is it not showing up?
Yeah, I thought it just came up.
But it-
Thursday?
But you're looking under yesterday's.
Yes.
Yeah, but I thought I put it up again today. Sorry, I'll put it up again.
Okay. And the one that's up there is the letter, the prioritization letter from Secretary Moore.
Okay.
April 10th.
Yeah. Updated, okay. You got that, so I just opened my own letter.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Because interesting, where,
That's our. I thought it was my Secretary Morris letter.
Well, I think, again, I'd probably end up talking about both is my guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in wherever is most useful to you all. I can walk through our letter, if you would like to start there.
Let's do that.
Okay. So, obviously the top priority on our list relates to the funding for PCB remediation in schools. We had proposed a total initiative in the governor's recommend of $10 million. The 480,000 that's not reflected in the A&R account would go to the health department to support a staff position that really reviews the data and develops occupancy recommendations for schools. This money is all intended to be used for mitigation and remediation. It is not planned to support additional testing other than what's needed to confirm the success of the mitigation and remediation measures we propose to implement. And this is targeted to schools where we have already completed indoor air testing and found exceedances of primarily the immediate action level in primary instructional spaces. And what that means is the health department has developed 2 different levels, an immediate action level that essentially says you should not be using this space until remediation and mitigation activities occur. And then a school action level that acknowledges there's a defined health risk associated with ongoing exposure, what long term. So in my science speak, I would say the first one is an acute standard and the second one is a chronic standard. We've seen exceedances of PCB concentrations in classrooms, also in places like hallways or bathrooms, closets. Tend to be parts of the school with maybe poorer air circulation than classrooms. But this money would really work on those primary instructional spaces where right now schools are either being encouraged to limit the number of hours that staff and students spend in those spaces or not use them at all. We have a small number of schools, and they are listed in the letter, where that condition exists, and they would be the priority for funding. To fully remediate PCBs in these schools, we have projected could cost as much as $30 million. So I just wanna assure you, recognizing there's this challenge in timing with school construction and are we making good investments, knowing we may need to make much larger investments in certain school buildings or disinvest from them entirely. These are what we believe are mitigation and remediation activities that are important in the immediate to allow the schools to continue to use their instructional spaces and operate. The reduction, the 40% reduction proposed by the House would limit our ability to address all of these schools. Our best estimate is the amount that remains would largely be taken up with finishing work underway at North Country Union High School, which has sort of been the I would say the poster child for why we initiated the PCB testing initiative, and that we found widespread PCB levels that exceeded both the immediate and school action levels throughout one of the 3 buildings on their campus. And so would just put that at the top of my list in terms of those resources are really, I think, essential in sort of finishing what we have started, recognizing about half of Vermont schools still need to be tested. That's probably a conversation for another day, but in areas where we have established this high level of risk, it feels important to be able to go back and fulfill the commitments we've made to the school that we will work with them to address these high levels of PCBs.
Fair enough. This is something that's important to me. Knowing that there's a lot happening in the world of education right now, I realize that you're focused on the PCB remediation, wondering if you have any comments about the interplay with school construction or the potential for these buildings not being used as schools.
So ultimately, the PCB remediation is going to be need to take place for these schools or for these buildings to have other future potential uses too. Whether that is removal and disposal of contaminated materials. A lot of what we've seen as the biggest sources of PCBs is caulk, which has been a little remarkable to me. We've seen concentrations of 300,000 or more parts per million, so caulk that's 30% PCBs.
Wow.
Is and so around windows and expansion joints. I think we discovered in a couple of schools the unfortunate circumstance where they caulked around their air intake.
Oh,
And so they're sucking air past this PCB laden caulk and blowing it into the school building. So that material needs to be removed. Other instances, you know, we've had places where paint and other wall materials are off-gassing, where they're very thick, sticky paints you can actually coat those surfaces with to reduce that off-gassing into the school. Sometimes it's an aged heating and ventilation system where maybe sources of PCBs have been removed. And yet there's still traces of it in the ventilation system. So there's a bit of it depends. And in instances where we have not been successful in identifying the source material, we have worked with classrooms to install different versions of carbon air filters. Some are standalone units, and we know that there have been concerns about noise, and frankly, energy consumption associated with those units. More recently, we've worked with North Country Union High School on, I think they call them carbon blankets, but they sit into the univents in the classrooms and sort of flow through those univents. or blow through those filters before the air enters the building. So that's what I consider kind of the mitigation along with steps like paint as opposed to remediation where we're actually removing those materials. But this is important work sort of regardless of the use of the school or that school building. I would say our concerns are heightened when it comes to both children, because smaller children can tolerate lower levels of exposure, but also for staff who spend far more than years in these buildings. They may spend an entire career. And so even if these structures are to be repurposed into other uses, that PCB remediation need will remain. I think the one question mark is around if there's an intention to do a building tear down or a full blown refurbishment of an existing school building. Again, these PCB containing materials have to be handled as hazardous waste. And so they still will require a heightened degree of management. Even if it is that the structure itself is no longer going to exist in its present form.
Thank you. And one other question for you about this. You'd mentioned that the, so does this, I mean, so the ask was a 9.5 million. That does include follow-up testing or, because I had thought that there was another line item that was for testing.
No.
So it's all included in this. So this would be for remediation, mitigation, and follow test to be like, what did it work?
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
I don't have a question. Secretary and I talked about this the other day, and it was very helpful. And I also, in finance, we were taking testimony from the Agency of Education about school construction. So I asked about this budget request and if they supported it and how it fit in their concept of school construction. They do support it. And I think, one of my concerns was sort of the similar, like, oh, we're about to do all these, the school construction, why? But I am convinced that we do need to focus on this. And we started this program and never funded it. And so now we have these 4 schools that are in this really hard place. And I also checked in with Senator Gulick, who has done an enormous amount of work on this. And she also really urged us to support this full ask as well. I think the House there's 4 million in the House budget for it, I believe.
I think there's the 5.5 million, they reduced it by 4 million.
Oh, they reduced it by 4 million. Okay, so that's better actually. So we would just need to put 4 million back into it.
Great. That's something that I would love to see us do. So we'll flag that back to modifying your letter. Yes, go ahead.
Did you say that the actual identified need is more like 30?
In the, what we called our tier 1 or priority 1 students, yeah.
And that, those that haven't risen the level of needing immediate action.
Correct.
The real need is 30.
Correct, although that would include, we're focused on primary instructional spaces, right? As opposed to areas like closets and hallways and bathrooms where there are high concentrations, but you don't expect people to spend lots of time.
And this, that 30 million is also for the tier 1 level.
That's
Correct.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's what you're.
level. That's what I'm trying to put.
Okay.
Thanks.
So there might be like a level, we have so many tiers in this community. We're gonna call it level 2.
Yeah. So what we tested roughly 150 schools, about half of the schools that had significant construction during this window when PCB containing materials were out for purchase. About a third of all schools have elevated levels of PCBs. But of that third, it's only about half that really have highly elevated levels of PCBs, and then it's this small subset identified in my letter where those levels are both high and in primary instructional spaces. So it's there's a separate memo which I'm happy to share where we worked through kind of a recommended prioritization criteria to ensure we're really going to the places that are most impactful.
Great. Other things on your radar you want to talk about?
Climate Superfund Act. So I did see in your draft letter, you proposed the funding for the treasurer's office. I would make a pitch that the, particularly funding for the attorney position in A&R feels critical. The contracted support, that we will need to sort of complete our, review and assessment of different approaches for assigning, responsibility for carbon emissions, I agree, can sort of lag behind the treasurer's work, but obviously we are already facing legal challenges. As I assume most of you are aware, Jane and I are being sued by the American Petroleum Institute as well as the US Chamber of Commerce. The president's EO from last week would lead me to suspect that the federal government may join that case against us, and it creates significant workload both within A&R and at the Attorney General's office, and just would say to the extent that we are committed to moving forward with this this effort, we do need that capacity. And you know, would make the case for the $500,000 in contracted support too, but am also willing to come back again and have that conversation next year. I think there would be benefit in the work the treasurer is proposing to undertake. He's going to look at the feasibility of developing these cost assessments for the climate hazards most present in Vermont, namely flooding. You know, there's a methodology that exists, but it really is focused on heat so far. And so I think that proof of concept about the work that could be done in principle and whether or not it actually works is really important. And so can appreciate it may not make sense to go that next step into the carbon matrix database and other data review.
Okay. Great.
Let's see. And then, you know, I guess I just feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't flag like overall concern about advancing new initiatives in the budget without addressing existing obligations. And so that's Climate Superfund, but also Act 181. We, in testifying on that bill last year, had indicated we needed 4 positions in the agency to support its implementation.
What Act 181
It's the Act 250 modernization bill. And did not receive any positions, were effectively directed to come back this year with that request. It remains. And so to the extent you're committed to advancing that work, which feels like it is, because I haven't heard anything about pulling it back. Just ask that you reconsider whether new resources to other other entities, whether it's conservation districts or others, should come in advance of the statutory mandates the agency is currently subject to. And to the extent it's helpful, from my seat as AMR secretary, I would prioritize resources into Climate Superfund and Act 181 over additional resources for the Flood Safety Act. I understand the urgency associated with that work. I feel like we have put together a competent, credible approach with the resources we have available, and know there's always more that can be done and sooner. But I feel like that work is moving forward successfully, and there are other places we are absolutely without resources to meet the obligations that currently sit with the agency.
So you mentioned 4 positions, and I'm seeing 2 positions in the Fish and Wildlife Department.
Correct, those are the highest priority.
Okay.
Of those 4, we were asked to
Right, and
also prioritize that.
can you tell us about what those 2 positions in Fish and Wildlife would be doing?
Sure. So one of them would initially work on some of the rulemaking requirements around forest fragmentation and the road rule to help ensure that it sort of works with the regulatory tool or the review tools we have and use. And then would ultimately move into becoming the person performing regulatory review. So as projects come in and trigger A&R interests, to have additional capacity, anticipating there would be more applications given that expansion of Act 250. The other position I would say is more GIS focused from our inception. We are continuing to support the LURB in looking at tier 3 right now and different ways to sort of pull off that most sensitive areas of the landscape. So there's work in that space. Honestly, I think this person's work would tip over a little bit into what we're doing in Act 59 as well, which is the 30 by 30 conservation bill. And again, mapping tools are really important in helping identify and prioritize ecological reserve areas and different critical habitats that we might pursue for conservation. But so really, one would be kind of a regulatory review almost exclusively from inception through implementation, and the other person would be focused on more of the GIS and technical mapping support that is essential to our work.
And the other two,
One of them would be a second regulatory review coordinator within Fish and Wildlife, and the other one would be in our Office of Policy and Planning. So that's Billy Coster's team, and they're sort of the point of entry for Act 250 projects into the agency. The concierge service is probably, I don't know that applicants would feel like they're receiving concierge service, but that's how I think of it as when an Act 250 application touches multiple programs within the agency. It generally, might implicate fish and wildlife interest, wetlands, stormwater, wastewater, drinking water. Billy and his team work to ensure applicants get one consistent answer from the agency as opposed to program specific answers that we work real hard to make sure align, but at times have some amount of conflict and overlap. And so it would create another one of those regulatory policy analysts is the job title in Billy's shop. Again, anticipating additional Act 250 applications that would be subject to A&R review.
okay, that's great. Thank you for that, for breaking that down. Really appreciate that.
Sure.
The
The last piece is more of a technical thing, which is just in the budget bill, there's language around ARPA and reverting that money come July 1st of 27. If it is not fully expended and encumbered, I am concerned that if that is a really crummy time to do that potential sweep, and would encourage you to look at pushing that date out to the end of the calendar year. That puts us smack dab in the middle of the construction season. And so to the extent that the General Assembly would rely on a report in vision, it may be incomplete and we may be kind of mid-stride with a lot of projects. The hope, or my hope, in having had some of our ARPA funds replaced with state general fund was to give us the benefit of that additional construction season. So we have this summer and next summer, and the idea of that swap was to give us the summer of 2027 to complete those projects as well. And I just worry that this is going to create a lot of challenges at the moment. We're working to build things. And so if that deadline could be moved to December, it makes clear that we will be all the way through the 27 construction season and have the best available information for the General Assembly about what dollars we have expended, which is hopefully all of them, and what dollars remain.
And there's no other deadlines within the ARPA law that would prevent us from extending it? Okay.
These are what Doug Farnham refers to as cured dollars. So essentially, there was some ability to swap state general fund dollars for ARPA dollars for certain services. So I think a lot of like correction staff time, that would be a question for Doug, honestly, was an ARPA eligible expense. So Doug has gone through the mechanics. Those dollars are now effectively general fund dollars, so they don't have an expiration date. We've created one, and I'm just asking that expiration date be pushed to the end of calendar 27.
Great. Did you have a question, Cindy?
No, that
Not
was
comment.
just I wanted that clarification to see, because I know there are deadlines for ARPA, but. Was gonna ask her about the cured junk, and that's what I thought it was, but I want to be sure.
Okay. Yes.
Just want to, a little bit more on the rivers, building the rivers, quarter positions.
Yep.
I know that when, talking to people back in my district, town managers, they kind of saying, we know this needs to happen, but we want to make sure that it's staffed. So that when, we don't end up with paralysis and not being able to, and so you're suggesting that you're able to, I think, are you saying you're able to do the work in the short run, but you're still gonna need those positions, or what?
I would like to reserve the right to come back and say we need the positions, but yes, in the short run, as we work through rulemaking and standing up a permitting program, I do believe we have the resources we need with the adjustments to timeline, that were in our housekeeping.
Okay, with the adjustments to the plan. Okay. Okay. So are you kind of saying you're good for one more year, or
At least,
okay?
and some of it honestly is we are continuing to hire those positions. We've filled a couple of them within just the last month or so. I've gotten the opportunity to meet new staff. And so helping those folks get up to speed and then seeing what gap remains is also gonna be important.
Okay, so you're already hired some.
Correct, so in FY 25 budget, there was sufficient resources for 11 of the 15 positions authorized under the Flood Safety Act. And we, I believe 6 of those positions are in the Rivers program, some of them are in our National Flood Insurance team, and then some of them are in what will become that regulatory program. And we are nearly complete, I think, at this point, hiring this position.
Are hiring some of them, it's just the last few that.
There were 4 positions where there were numbers created, 2 in dam safety and 2 in the Rivers program, where we just couldn't have the resources.
Okay. Great, thank you for clarifying all that, that was very helpful. Any other questions, Secretary Moore, about these priorities? Okay, super, so want to transition now back into a conversation about the budget letter. Coming back to it, so switching from documents perhaps to this letter that is a chart.
This is the committee letter.
The committee letter,
For Wednesday.
yes, and wondering,
Right there.
based on conversation, what things folks might want to include, amend, etc.
Sure, I think we should add the 4 million for the school PCs. Yeah, you should just stay.
I assume this might be a good idea.
Yeah.
Cause I think that arguments that I've heard are compelling. And I think we had reserved this 500,000 for A&R. We had tagged it as Flood Safety Act based on what we've heard, but. I think the secretary would know her staffing levels better than us, so if she thinks that we should do Fish and Wildlife for Act 181, then for 2 positions, I think we should do that instead, and that was also a lower amount of money, because 2 positions would be around 300,000.
Although I would ask if you consider adding a lawyer position to the planning and super fund.
Right, that's a different item, that's under we have this 625 for the treasurer's office, and I think you had said 175 for lawyer, they're expensive, those lawyers. We could add 175 there on that. That would be so that would be a total of 800,000 for items.
Wait.
Hang on a minute here, and I'll be right with you. Okay, so, okay, so 175 for the attorney position. Okay.
And I don't know if it makes sense to add to the budget letter, or have you just tell Andy about the sweep language.
I think it doesn't hurt to include it in the letter, and have it come from me.
Well, all of this is gonna be both
Yeah,
and.
yeah, right, exactly. So I'm gonna make a note, about. Note about that, other comments or thoughts, unless there's anything else that you wanted to.
No, I mean, I think that's it. I mean, that's everything that you.
Right. And also on board for all of the, it's very, so happy to get on board, yes.
Well, we have to do the one position, one positions that happens in Florida, so that has to happen in favor of attorney.
Okay.
And PCBs, it's you know, it's one level of not enough we're gonna do.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, would, agree. And, just so I characterize it properly, would you, that last part about, the ARPA money, you would characterize that as an extension of the deadline, basically to encumber, or expend the money? Okay.
Correct.
Great.
Yeah, I think in my letter, I give this, there's a specific citation to where it sits in the big bill currently. It's
Okay.
it would
Yes,
essentially just be replacing July
Right, it was
first, like December 31st.
it's like E 100 something.
That's at this point is kind of self-imposed.
It is.
Right? Yeah, okay.
It is,
Yeah.
I can already anticipate the chaos that will
Yeah.
result in my
Yes.
shop.
So, yeah, appreciate that. Any other thoughts, Senator Williams, Senator Beck? No. Okay. Okay,
Thank you.
okay, thank you.
Appreciate your
So-
consideration.
I'm gonna work these additions up into the letter. I'll send it around again. Just so you all know, in appropriations, we have talked through one letter in committee, so not feeling like we are too far behind. These conversations they're rolling right now, so, we'll, my hope it would be, I think, to fit in, just one further follow-up tomorrow on the new draft. And see if we can have a straw poll vote on it tomorrow. Okay, super, thank you.
Appreciate your consideration.
Absolutely, and we are absolutely cruising in our, agenda here.
So we got 11 o'clock.
I know, 11 o'clock, things are taking far less time than I had anticipated. Which, yeah, again, not a bad problem, there were problems.
I did email Mr. Kamen to see if he could come in at 10:30, but I haven't heard from him yet.
Yeah, I can also go see if I can find Neil. He's
Okay,
upstairs.
well,
Thank
So
you.
coming back at 10.
that's what I was hearing, and let's plan on 10:30 and we'll check in, we'll see if he's here and we'll start the meeting.
Alright.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
Shut the sound off, please.
yes.
Senator Watson? It's 10:32. I don't know if you want to put the sound back on and go live or wait for Senator Hardy. But I can't hear you, of course. Okay. Okay.
Okay, now we're on.
Oh, okay, we are live.
Well,
Or
we have one.
audible. Well, so that's okay. Just, Jude, let's chat about agenda stuff after this is,
Okay, and Mr. Kamen, if you want to project your slides, you need to accept the Zoom link that I sent you this morning.
this is Senate Natural Resources and Energy coming back from a break, and switching topics from earlier in the day. But moving on to H41, our 3-acre stormwater bill, and would love to welcome Mr. Kamen up.
All right, good morning, senators. For the record, my name is Neil Campbell. I'm the Deputy Commissioner, Department of Environmental Conservation, and I'm very happy to be in front of you in person today.
Yes.
So thank you for your forbearance the other day. I was down on Cape Cod, as I said, which is always a nice place to be when it's not 35 degrees and raining all day, which it was. If it's okay with the committee, I'd like to ask John Tito and Kevin Burke from our department to join me
Absolutely.
here, because I think this will be a team effort. Okay, so thank you again for taking up the thank you again for taking this up. It's an important bill. Again, the department supports it. We've seen some changes from Ledge Council O'Grady, all good. So we support all of that and look forward to continuing. If you would like to make any other changes to the bill, we'll look forward to providing input on that. Senator Hardy and others have raised a number of good questions, and what I want to do here, so we've submitted a pretty robust testimony package for you all, and I mean, it is definitely robust. What I thought I would do is just go through the questions that we heard articulated, both at our session on Friday and then again subsequent from your other witnesses. Not with the answers, just go through those questions and then open the table and see what it is you'd like to chat about with us. That might be efficient.
Great.
So firstly, you have requested lists of sites and lists of investments, and we have provided that. There's a complete listing of all of the permitted sites, their site type, commercial, residential, HOA, things like that. Please note that we removed PII from that list. We didn't want to produce a list where an individual's name and address and permit status could be all tied together.
What is PII?
Personally identifiable
Okay.
info. Yeah, technically it's not PII, but essentially, we're here to talk about our progress, not to produce resources that third parties can use, right, for any purpose. So we also have a site of investments, and those are aggregated at the town level and also at the county level for you, so you can see how many big public dollars are going. And then a number of questions that have come up. So let's see. All right, the lists. And then we provided some insight for you into sort of the distinction between permitting around an HOA site, permitting around a commercial site. This math problem of MRGP, municipal road general permit coverage vis-a-vis 3 acre. We've got a robust discussion around that. One of the things in our testimony is just a breakout of how many ag fairs we have, how many gravel and quarry pits there are. And then we've provided information to you on sort of some of the feasibility challenges for on-site treatment and how the rule deals with that. We have some information for you on whether we can prioritize certain sites over others with respect to pollution reduction. The math problem, as I said, I'm just going through and articulating the high level of what we've got here. These issues of a residential neighborhood that doesn't have an HOA and how we handle that. And then some information about 3-acre sites that are housing developments that are more rural in nature, right? As opposed to sort of in the impervious area. So, and of course, I'll call it the Richmond scenario of an upstream neighborhood providing water to a downstream neighborhood, but only the downstream neighborhood being on the hook.
Right.
So Kevin Burke's team, especially Mr. Purcell, whom you heard the other day, did a great job of providing written testimony on this. So please don't try to read it now. Tell me which pieces and parts you'd like to talk about, and we are here.
But I actually want to talk about all of them. So maybe I'm gonna take a step back for now. I mean, the way that I have been thinking about this bill is that because we have a study in there right now about the potential for regionalizing stormwater utilities, seeing how that could potentially work. But then there are these other issues, and it seems like some of these there are a lot of the questions that you have addressed here might be good fodder for either extension of that study or a separate study or a report, something to that effect. And just as I am, because I haven't had time obviously to digest all of
I
it.
don't expect any of you to have.
But-
We were working on it until yesterday night.
But I am looking forward to going through this. I think I very much appreciate all the time that you all put into making this happen. So thank you. Really, really grateful. At a kind of a high level, do you think it would be useful to spend some more time to think about some of these questions, pathways for properties that don't have a complete set of HOA folks participating, or the options for people with the upstream effluent coming into their properties that's uncovered. Prioritization, if you can comment generally about what further either time or if you want to make recommendations to us about could you change the law in X, Y, or Z way, would that be useful to you?
Yeah, so thank you. I'm just about to turn it over because I'm
Oh,
going
okay.
so far over my skis. So
Okay.
I'm just gonna blow up wildly. So what's struck me is that a lot of what you're hearing and the questions that you're articulating aren't actually affected by the policy changes in the bill, right? Like the policy changes in the bill are fundamentally PTT, some additional time,
Yeah.
some financial mechanisms, little municipal assistance, and then obviously the study committee. So going in a study committee and looking at regionalization is excellent, and going in and sort of relitigating some of the construction of the permit is where it gets a little bit more nuanced, so we want to be a little more careful. So this is where I'd like to maybe turn it over to Kevin to speak to some of these more detailed issues. Maybe we can start with, because I know it's really of interest, let's talk about in this table today, the upstream neighborhood piece and the existing road and whether that results in a 3-acre. Maybe we can touch on those two for starters.
Yeah.
And Kevin, if you are able to comment on that, but also, if there's space inside a follow-on study committee to kind of look further at that.
And
Can I add one thing to that list is the question of the implications of lowering to a smaller amount of impervious surface, so like going to 2.75 acres.
Sure.
And whether or not there would be some low hanging fruit there that we could pick, that would be easier. I know there are broader implications to doing that, and so I'd like to hear what that is,
Yeah.
what those are.
You can, I know you're prepared to speak to that too.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, let me step back and let Kevin take the.
Sure, for the record, Kevin Burke, program manager for the PEC Stormwater Program. Since we just had that question, we can start with that in terms of the threshold. If we were to lower the threshold, we would certainly need to revisit the TMDL. I think that's one complicating factor. We would need to both update statute, rule, and perhaps the general permit on reducing the threshold. That seems to suggest that we would take others that are perhaps infeasible in the 3-acre world off the list, which could be challenging from an equity standpoint. It can be done. You could reduce the threshold through and identify sites that are low hanging fruit. The department does have residual designation authority, or RDA, and that's where you designate a site as needing a permit. But again, targeting one site and not another puts us in a similar situation to some developments not being captured and some being captured. But it can be done. There's certainly 2-acre sites out there that could use some stormwater treatment. I don't think it's going to be the large parking lots we hear so much about, because there is a lot of regulated development already under stormwater permits in the watershed. So that might be something that could be revisited, but I think it needs to be well thought out, and whether that's through a committee, that would be somewhat of a time-consuming task just to understand what sites are available. Perhaps looking at a small section of the overall watershed to Lake Champlain as an example, and seeing sort of what the implications would be. So that might be an avenue, but it certainly can be done. But again, I think the equity issue comes to mind immediately as to how you would identify, how would you let some sites off the hook and others on the hook. It would be less of an issue, I think, if there was financial support to achieve that. If there's not, the equity issue becomes really, really big. So I think that's something to consider going forward.
So under the 3-acre regime or whatever, what happens or if you get to the point where you just realize, okay, this is infeasible, like either logistically, technically, or financially, and you just can't do a site, what happens then? Or have you gotten there with any of the sites?
We have sites that can't meet the standard, and that's where impact fees do apply currently. Whereas those funds, based on a watershed account, would then be available for a site that is able to provide additional treatment beyond the standard of a certain amount. But so there is mechanisms for sites that can't do anything. They still get a permit. They're still required to maintain their system as it was previously permitted. But that, it's offset through an impact fee. The other option is to find a municipally sponsored offset project. So if a particular development was completely unable or was just infeasible, couldn't get people together, there was a municipality that was willing to work with the program to find another area of impervious that is not otherwise regulated in the watershed, that there could be a viable project. That would take some research and looking into as to where those projects might be. But you also have to be careful not to stray into other sectors of the TMDL where certain projects might be already accounted for in developed lands.
Could I jump in on
Yeah,
that point and maybe redirect to you to sort of talk about how a 2.5 acre site that presents a super low hanging fruit might be handled right now?
Yeah, sure. For the record, my name is Gianna Petito. I'm the grant supervisor for the Clean Water Initiative Program. So to add on to what Kevin's saying, 2.5 acres currently is what we would call sort of a non-regulated site. And when you sort of step back from 3 acre and look at how the state prioritizes cost efficient opportunities, that's really at the Clean Water Board and budgeting level. And so that really falls into that tier 1 non-regulatory work going to the clean water service providers, or another side is the state enhancement grants. All of them can fund stormwater projects as long as they're non-regulatory in nature. So some of the TMDL assumed there'd be a lot of achievement through regulation, and then what's left, let's assign that to a clean water service provider. And so when you sort of tweak what becomes regulatory, it doesn't necessarily like open up the project opportunities, it sort of just moves that. But I might also say that one of the things that the regional study can contemplate, right, is this opportunity that maybe you don't have to regulate a smaller site, but it opens up the opportunity of offset at a regional level, right? So it aggregates all the 3 acre sites in the utility potentially and says this is one target. Where are the most cost effective sites to do that within the region? So I think it kind of gets at the same idea, but it doesn't kind of force it at site by site, or let's regulate over here because it's smaller, but more cost efficient, but might explore that moving around offset opportunity.
So to follow up on that, I had thought that there was some prohibition on mitigating phosphorus at a different site through the Clean Water Act. Is that not?
You're getting into sort of the way the TMDLs are structured, and now I said that plural on purpose because they're actually one for each section of the lake.
Okay.
Right, and so you need to keep the reductions. If they're regulatory reductions, they live in the regulatory box
Yeah.
within its watershed. And if they're
Okay.
non-regulatory, they live in the non-regulatory box within its watershed. Going back and forth between the two gets super complicated, and that's where
Okay.
you're fundamentally into the concept of nutrient trading, which we've reported on.
That's what it was, nutrient trading.
So, but what Gianna said makes a lot of sense, because if you have a regional utility that's able to look at the full suite of opportunities, full suite of the 3 acre target, right, and then identify the opportunity for some of those offsets, that is a possibility, and especially if it's expensive work that the clean water service provider may not be able to prioritize from a cost effectiveness standpoint. Because the more expensive the non-regulatory project, the less likely the clean water service provider is to take it, because they have other less expensive opportunities. In many, but not all watersheds.
So that's super interesting, thinking about this regionalized approach, not just being strictly tied to stormwater utilities, but as a review of where cost-effective projects could be done.
So that happens, that happens right now in an aggregate, like the
Yes.
state is tracking that every year.
Mhm.
Gianna's great work and others in the Clean Water Initiative program. So you see that mathematically and mapped in the Clean Water Performance Report. If we're talking about a regional stormwater utility, that regional stormwater utility should be looking at regulated stormwater within its region.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are opportunities that are identified that are non-regulatory, that are super expensive, that's something where I think there's an area for possibly funding it. If the clean water service provider has such a number of projects that they're not going to be able to fund that. Am I kind of getting into a hole here?
It's an opportunity for the study committee to unpack for sure, but the language as you see now, for sure, contemplates or puts in this regional stormwater plan as a concept, and my recollection from the House committee was really that's sort of a space where they could do this analysis and very akin to currently what the MS4s do in the phosphorus control plan of saying, okay, what are the opportunities across our region within the watershed, but within bounds. I think you've definitely heard testimony from the DC as well as others about like how far can we go beyond develop lands or stormwater solutions, and there are some bounds there that sort of rub up against the TMDL and really looking at the developed lands sector as a solution there.
Did you have anything on the call? I know I kind of asked him.
No, it's okay, I'm kind of mulling it,
Thank
I'm
you.
not sure I understand it all, but I'm working on it.
Okay, Senator Williams.
So I understand now that the clean water providers are gonna be doing a lot of this work. Because when I asked to prioritize the list, you get boots on the ground and find that, yeah, there's a problem here, but it's caused from somebody, like in Richmond's
Yeah.
Situation where people are saying, hey, you know, we got a problem, but it's coming from up there.
Yep.
And it all needs to be fixed, I get it, but I'm thinking about, you know, you've got a target.
Mhm.
We have so many, your TMDL from stormwater. Maybe this is gonna get bigger than what we think it is, if we try to fix it all. Well, how long of a period of time are we talking about once we get started on this?
So, okay, so there's that last question.
Yeah.
I'll answer kind of just straight up, like, we have till 2036 to implement it.
Okay.
But your first question is actually one of the big questions, which is sort of how the Richmond issue, the upstream and downstream stormwater. So I'm gonna say, and then turn it over to Kevin for the more detailed answer. I'm just gonna say that the study presents us an opportunity to look at that differently, right? So if there was a regional stormwater utility that was looking at that whole set of neighborhoods, and that there were opportunities upstream of that 3-acre site in its 3-acre box, that they would be able to both go there, build there, also create a larger fee area to help draw funds, right? So I think there's real opportunity with the regional utility concept to help with that. That said, I want to turn to Kevin just to speak a little bit about how this is already handled now, because this is something that's contemplated in the rule and in the permit.
I think it comes down to feasibility, you know, the Richmond site, is one where you do have upslope contributing runoff. Not unlike, you know, we see new development that has upslope development, whether existing or recently developed, that contributes or may run through their site, might, you know, go to a combined pipe that they both feed into. 3-acre sites are not required to treat the upslope stormwater runoff. The target for that 3-acre site is based strictly on the impervious for that previously permitted development area. That said, we do, through our technical review, make sure that a design would be accommodating that flow, if it's contributing, say, to the system that they built, to make sure that it's not going to overwhelm it, that it's still going to be effective at meeting what they're designing it for. In some cases, it could be safely bypassing that flow, or, you know, through a flow splitter or some other mechanism, to, you know, they're going to still meet their target and allow that water to safely be conveyed around the site. Another thing that comes to mind is, you know, particularly in the Richmond case, the municipal road is part of that site as well, and the municipal road continues and is part of the upslope runoff. You know, if you had a municipality that was like, well, these homeowners might not make the most sense to try to treat their target all within that previously permitted boundary, but was able to, say, identify, hey, if we capture some of that upslope runoff and some of the road runoff within that 3-acre site, we might not necessarily need to capture the homes and driveways and some type of treatment system. You know, you'd essentially be offsetting some of the development by capturing some of that offsite runoff. I think there are, you know, creative ways to permit things without impacting, you know, the private individual lots. But every site is a little bit different. So, you know, having some municipal assistance can make some of those possibilities a little bit more feasible.
So this is
Just a follow-up. So I used to live in Richmond, so I'm familiar with the areas that you're talking about. So I didn't mean to single them out, but.
That's a good example.
Right, so my concern from my constituents is this has been around since 2015. And they've been, people that knew they were on the list have been on the list, and it was kind of like, well, nothing's gonna happen. And now all of a sudden, something's gonna happen, so we're hearing the anxiety from the businesses and the homeowner associations that have known it was coming. And now we're starting to hear, well, what about Joe across the road? You know, he's got a problem over there. If we get to that point where Joe, you know, we can actually see the problem that Joe across the road is causing. I get it, we need to fix it, but I'm just looking for some relief for people to know that their issues are gonna be addressed. There's some money available for permitting. I'm with you. Hopefully we can get out of this. Right.
Thank you, Snre.
Yeah, so I wanna dig in a little bit to what you were just saying and. Cause. You know, the example that we heard was the Richmond example of this, the development down the slope from the other development. And what I think I heard you say was if the municipality was. Willing to get involved and try to find a solution that involved the entire neighborhood. And a stormwater solution that could focus on the roads, then you might not have to deal with the individual homeowners. Is that what
I'll
you're
just
saying,
kind
or-
of give a scenario. Let's say their target was, you know, granted, we have a 50% redevelopment standard, basically means a 3-acre site. In most cases, there's some exceptions, needs to treat half of their impervious. So let's say that is, for a 6-acre site, it's 3 acres. Like, where are we gonna manage 3 acres of impervious? If the municipality goes, well, we could manage the 1.5 acres of roadway within the downslope development, but we've also got another 1.5 acres that's commingled with that. Maybe we'll find a project or a design that can. You know, we're still capturing 3 acres of impervious, and perhaps it might even be. More beneficial because it is the roadway. Can find a place that's located maybe within the right of way or. Secure some location for a treatment without involving some of the individual lots. That said, you know, individual lots that are set on lawns and have vegetated areas around them. If some of the runoff from homes and driveways is being dispersed through vegetated areas, it's essentially called disconnection, where you're not sending all the runoff down the driveway into the street, it's going out on the lawn. There's credit given for that. So that 3-acre impervious target for every site that is already, you know, in a position where runoff from the homes is already being distributed, you know, that's credit. So that number, that impervious number that remains is lower.
Okay.
Consider that. And you would want to look at the entire development.
Yeah, so is that kind of technical assistance being provided to municipalities so they can think more creatively about these solutions?
I think we often get stuck at, we can't do this. And we need to make the next step and engage with municipality. They have to be willing. I think there are some municipalities that are more willing because they perhaps do have a utility. Smaller municipalities don't have the capacity to offer. But we are, if we were to look at a plan or sit down with the town, or if they reached out to us, we're available to have those conversations and to look at offset opportunities. But they have to be a willing participant and, you know, likely then they would be on the hook for maintaining the system. And how that's addressed without putting the burden on other regulated residents within the town. Whether it's special tax district or so forth, that's kind of, you know, case by case and municipality by municipality. A broader look at that kind of model would be, you know, Richmond doesn't have to look at their town boundary. Maybe the stormwater utility that's regionalized. We say, well, we need to meet this target. And if we're able to meet this in the same watershed, again, with the boundaries that Gianna spoke of. Find a project that would be meeting that target, not necessarily in the town of Richmond.
And if they do that, is the original 3 acre site off the hook, so to speak?
In terms of implementation, that would be, determined how, would the residents be contributing in some other financial mechanism through a special tax district, or would there be simply a grant or a loan, some other mechanism that's being provided to the town or the stormwater utility? They would still need to maintain their permit. So this, many of these developments that are individual lots and they're linked together and designated as a 3 acre site have a previously issued stormwater permit. Even aside from 3 acre, they need to renew and maintain that permit.
But if the permittee is no longer around, or, a lot of times, as we heard through testimony, was a developer who, isn't around anymore, or in one case, we heard the developer had passed away, so there's not an actual permit holder for some of the previous permits, so how does that work? And the whole concept of forcing people into an HOA for this is just so painful to hear.
Yeah, and we can't require property owners to form an HOA. But in order to permit, we need some legal entity taking responsibility for the permit and system. It could be, as we do today with new development, it could be a co-permittee situation between a town and a legal entity. We do require an association or some legal entity apply for permits when the developer is proposing a new project. They form this and they put it in the deed. So it's established on the front end before lots are purchased and developed and so forth. But somebody needs to take responsibility, whether that's, municipality or some other legal entity.
Okay.
And I think the concept of the regional utility does offer some real opportunity. Right, so if the regional utility is assisting these groups of neighbors that are not necessarily HOAs, that's helpful.
Yeah, they wouldn't, if there was a project identified somewhere else. They, that the town might be more apt to, the town of Richmond, for example, did renew the permit for a particular subdivision. And some of the neighboring subdivisions that are sub 3 acre for many years, but I think now that the cost of upgrade is coming to the forefront, it's a little more challenging for the town to step up like they did under the orphan program. But if there is, if there was a project established somewhere and they have financial support to do it, the homeowners wouldn't necessarily have to form an association.
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that point. So if there was a regional entity that either could take responsibility or be helping people navigate this, then they might not need to form an HOA?
Right, if there's a legal entity such as the town, if a municipality, say, took over, hey, we're going to, they already own and operate the road and maintain catch basins, the drainage. There wouldn't necessarily need to be upgrades at that location. But they would maintain the permit as they did in the past, just as it is.
Okay, so it's the you're saying the municipality.
Municipality or the regional
Or the regional.
water
Yeah.
entity.
It just needs some
would become the legal entity that holds the permit.
We do have, I can think of, at least a couple of residential developments that did not have an HOA. They didn't form an HOA, they formed like a stormwater corporation or limited. Basically everybody, it's an association in the sense, but it's only for the purpose of the stormwater permit. There are nothing to do with how you manage your property, what color your house is, what color your mailbox, all that. It's really just for the sake of ensuring for clean title and the system that gets maintained Some of them have an agreement between the municipality. I know Williston, this is typically their model. They establish an agreement between the entity and the municipality as to who's gonna pay for what, who's responsible for what. And then they move forward. And I think, you know, we've made some progress on those sites and we don't hear from them. We hear mostly about the ones that are really up against the wall and haven't quite found a solution.
What about this one? And I hate to pick out single sites because it's a little awkward, but we did get testimony on this one. It's actually in Center Williams District, the development in Rutland that is, I think, an apartment and multi-family home development that's apparently has a lot of green space, and then in the middle of it is this development, and they were saying that they have a hard time meeting the requirements. I didn't quite understand if it was because there was no legal entity or it was a technical reason they couldn't do it, you know?
I don't know offhand
Okay.
specifically, Terry certainly would know. I don't know if it was a legal entity or it was just the fact that, you know, green space can be present, but if it's not in the place where the water is going to go, not going to help you a whole lot. So that could be, that would be a similar situation, you know, if there's an offset opportunity or if they can't meet the standard, they would be subject to an impact fee. I know we talked about impact fees and providing some relief there, so it didn't feel so we're moving for punitive. That would be helpful in terms of allowing, hey, we can't do everything, but we can do this. And you're not necessarily being subject to the impact fee just because you can't 100% meet the standard.
Just so I know, the impact fee, is that a one-time thing or is that ongoing?
One time.
It's one time.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting, yes, so
There's just a question, but it's a legal question, but say I bought a piece of property in 2015 and it was on the list and nobody told me it was on the list. Now all of a sudden, you know, we don't have a homeowners association. Are we opening ourselves up to a bunch of lawsuits here? Because somebody's like, hey, never told me I was on the list, now I gotta pay additional $40,000 for the, you know, the work that needs to be done here.
It comes down to, you know, we didn't designate any 3-acre sites that didn't, multi-lot 3-acre sites that didn't already have a previously issued permit. Generally, previously issued stormwater permits come up in title searches. If it was purchased before the 3-acre list came out to designate that you're going to have to upgrade, you might be aware that there was a permit attached or even an Act 250 permit attached to the property, but you know, you might not be aware. It's the situation that many of these are in. And unfortunately, some of these property owners may not have been aware of even the previously issued stormwater permit, because it wasn't picked up in the title search. Thank you.
And I think the bill gets to that standard, you know, with that new requirement that was included for, again, a sort of affirmative notification. So at least we're take another step at that.
Yeah, right. So I just want to, I'm revisiting the list that I had come up with.
Yep.
The other day, and so I feel like I'm starting to I'm starting to understand this possibility of a regionalized stormwater entity. I kind of want to not, maybe it's technically utility, but I feel like I want to call it something else because it might function a little differently than traditional municipal stormwater utility as you all are describing it. I think is that you know, being a permit holder, you know, being able to look regionally for projects, like that kind of thing. So one of the other things that was on my list was investigate other options for dealing with orphan permits. And what I feel like I'm hearing is that in the case of an orphan permit, if there was a regional entity, that they could become the default holder of that permit. Is that one vision.
If they, if it was set up that way such that they were going to take full legal responsibility. It gets into the question if they're just coordinating and then handing it over to a municipality, or if they would in fact operate in such a way that they would be the holder. That's certainly an option. Or an entity that doesn't have to, be the traditional utility. Maybe that would be something to dig into.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
So I'm looking at your list, which I appreciate the extra, and I haven't dug into the Excel files.
No,
yet.
that's fine, but they're there for you, so. Here, have at it.
The permit numbers that are listed in here, are those the new permits or are those existing permits?
Many of them are existing permits.
Okay, so how can we tell what's done? Like, I like to check things off and be like, yes, you win.
Yeah, generally, if you see a 90-50 suffix on the permit numbers, that's the current general permit. So that indicates that they've either recently come in with the initial NOI. So they could be, for example, at the top of the spreadsheet is DAR State Park.
Yeah,
And I don't know if they've gotten their full permit at this point, or if that might be representative of the initial NOI.
yeah, I have it up on my screen, yeah.
If you see a 9010 or a 9015. Those are not the current 3-acre permit.
Okay, so I guess one of the things I wanted to know was like how much is done? How much can we say, okay, we've gotten this one fixed? Because I see a lot of schools in here with no permit number, like just on this first page, Spalding High School in Berry City. I know you have the Green Schools Initiative, so I would have expected to see a permit number there or something indicating that they're done, or have you not gotten to them yet?
I don't know about Spalding.
Yeah, so what was not done with this list was to re-update the permit number to the newest permit number on the list.
Okay,
So I recognize that, though I thought this might have answered all your questions, actually it might not.
yeah, I guess I wanted to
I
know,
wanted to know how many of those 204, so it's 204 at this point that have been fully permitted, you wanted to see.
yeah, how many have we done? Like, how far along are we? And because that would also show, okay, what is left that are still to do, and how many of them are problematic or challenging in one way or another versus easy.
Senator Watson, it looks like we got kicked offline.